you, Mr. Speaker. You know, sitting here over the last 2.5 years, I'm starting to think that the Labour Party quite enjoys opposition because they can sit there and promise everything to everyone. They're going to be all things to all people. And suddenly, as we head into election cycle, they've gone, oh, we've got a $10 to $12 billion hole, and people are starting to ask, how are you going to pay for that? Oh, they said, haven't thought about that. Quick, let's have a wet round. I know, capital gains tax, that'll do it. They heard somewhere it had raised them $4.5 billion. That'd be good, they thought. That works for us. Their detailed economic analysis over there took the figure of $4.5 billion and said, we'll have that. But the problem with that is that Labour are economically illiterate. They haven't got an economic clue between them. They haven't stopped to consider that $4.5 billion, not only would it take 15 years to get to that level, 15 years, they won't be in government anything like that time if they make it at all, but it's also based on 33% rates of tax, and they're promising 15. It's based on an accrual mode, and they're talking about a realisation mode. And it's not going to be there in the time for them to fill their promises of doing everything we're doing and more and spending. They are going to very quickly realise that it is like all of their other plans, long on talk, short on delivery.
That's right.
This is another example of why Labour cannot be put in charge of the books of New Zealand.
That's right.
Why Labour have no idea how to run economy.
That's
and
right.
why Labour are the party that left us a decade of deficits after the best economic conditions the world has ever seen.
That's right.
This plan of Labour's, this grand scheme, at best 700 million. At best. But here's another thought. If property prices aren't going up, there is no gain. And what does it make for them then?
Zilch.
The big bagel. What's worse, if property prices go down, it will cost them money.
That's right.
It will cost them money as every investor files their tax return and claims for the multi-billion-dollar losses on their property falls, and Labour will find themselves in a bigger hole. If there is capital gain, who will be hit hardest by this? Let me tell you who's going to be hit hardest. Superannuitants,
That's right.
those on fixed incomes, and the people who create jobs.
That's right. Doctors.
That's what Labour's going to do. They're going to tax the superannuitants. They're going to tax the wealth creators in this country. And why?
Nurses.
So they can build a bigger public sector. So they can have more policy analysts telling them what to think. That's Labour's end game. Who in this country is successful? Go out there, tax the bejesus out of them, hand out more welfare, grow the government, and put more policy analysts around them. That's all that they're going to deliver. They've gone back to core Labour beliefs.
That's right. I don't have any beliefs.
They talk about being fair. What does fair mean? It means make everyone as poor as everyone else.
That's right.
Make everyone equally poor.
Mediocrity.
Labour's fundamental principle is equity is achieved when everyone is as poor as the lowest common denominator. That's not what this government stands for. This is a government that gets behind success, that celebrates aspirational New Zealanders, that celebrates people who are putting their capital into the productive economy, that are creating wealth, that are raising incomes, that are creating jobs. We don't go out there and penalise the successful. We celebrate winners, we reward winners, and we encourage productive growth in this economy. But let me tell you this. This is really interesting. Labour now are holding up this capital gains tax as the panacea of all ills. Well, I just want to read you this. The government is not interested in a capital gains tax, either in the short or the long term. Basically, it's political suicide.
Who?
Who did that come from? Michael Cullen.
What?
Michael Cullen. Political suicide, now or in the long term.
Oh,
Here's another one I quite liked. The New Zealand Labour government agrees that New Zealand would not be better off with a general capital gains tax. David Cunliffe. Isn't that interesting? So isn't that interesting? In the 2000s in government, hadn't we heard this before? New Zealand would be worse off with a capital gains tax. Quite right, Mr. Cunliffe. Most sensible thing I've heard you say for a while. Big hole, I would have thought. And Michael Cullen reassuring us that Labour has no interest in the short or the long term in a capital gains tax because it would be political suicide. Wise words, wise words. But what do we have now? We have an opposition that has promised everything, knows it can't deliver, and is desperate. It is desperate, because when you're as low as they are in the polls, you'll say anything to get you out of that hole.
Honourable Sir Roger Douglas.
Mr. Speaker, I want this afternoon